On the morning of January 24th, 2019, a crew of contractors arrived at an abandoned supermarket building in Council Bluffs, Iowa. The old No Frills grocery store had been sitting vacant for nearly 3 years, and their job that day was straightforward. Remove all the old refrigeration units, shelving, and equipment to prepare the building for its next tenant. It was supposed to be routine demolition work. But when the crew started pulling out the massive 12-foot-tall cooler units from the back storage area, one of the workers noticed something wedged in the narrow gap between the back of the coolers and the wall. At first, he thought it might be old inventory or trash that had fallen back there years ago. But as they pulled the cooler further away from the wall, the worker's stomach dropped. Because what he was looking at wasn't trash at all. It was human remains. And those remains had been there for a very, very long time. But before we dive into today's story, if you enjoy bizarre mysteries and tragic true cases told through immersive narrative storytelling, then you're in the right place. Because that's exactly what I do here. And I upload new stories 3 to 4 times every week. So if that interests you, please tell the like button you'll help them move this weekend, but then turn off your phone and spend the entire day at the beach instead. Also subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future uploads. All right, let's get into today's story, which takes place in Council Bluffs, Iowa, between 2009 and 2019. Larry Ely Murillo-Moncada was 25 years old in November of 2009. He lived with his parents, Victor and Anna, in a modest home in Council Bluffs, a city of about 60,000 people just across the Missouri River from Omaha, Nebraska. Larry worked at the local No Frills supermarket, a discount grocery store located less than a mile from his family's home. He'd been working there for a while and knew the store inside and out. His co-workers described him as a quiet, hard-working guy who mostly kept to himself, but was always friendly when you talked to him. But Larry was dealing with something that his family had become increasingly worried about. He had been struggling with his mental health, experiencing symptoms that had grown more severe in recent months. His mother, Anna, would later tell investigators that Larry had been prescribed medication to help manage his condition, but she believed he had stopped taking it regularly. The day before Thanksgiving in 2009, Larry worked his scheduled shift at No Frills. When he came home that evening, his mother immediately noticed something was wrong. Larry seemed disoriented and confused. He was acting strangely, not quite himself. His parents tried to talk to him, but Larry seemed agitated and increasingly upset. The next day was November 28th, 2009. That morning, Larry's behavior became even more erratic. He was experiencing what his mother would later describe as hallucinations and delusions. He seemed paranoid and frightened, though his parents couldn't understand what he was afraid of. And then suddenly, in the middle of the day, Larry ran out of the house. His parents called after him, trying to get him to come back inside, but Larry just kept running. Now here's an important detail you need to keep in mind. When Larry ran out of his parents' home that day, Council Bluffs was in the middle of a serious blizzard. Snow was coming down hard, the temperature was well below freezing, and visibility was terrible. But when Larry bolted out the front door, he was wearing only a hoodie and pants. No jacket, no socks, no shoes. He didn't grab his keys, his wallet, or his car. He just ran out into the blizzard barefoot and disappeared into the storm. Victor and Anna immediately went looking for their son. They drove around the neighborhood, checking all the places they thought he might go. They enlisted friends and family members to help search. But after hours of looking through the snowstorm with no sign of Larry, they called the Council Bluffs Police Department and filed a missing person report. Sergeant Brandon Danielson was assigned to investigate Larry's disappearance. He interviewed the parents, got a description of what Larry was wearing, and began the standard missing person procedures. Officers contacted family members, checked with friends, reached out to other law enforcement agencies. They even contacted U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement because Larry had been deported to Honduras years earlier before making his way back to the United States. But despite all these efforts, nobody had seen or heard from Larry Murillo-Moncada. In the days and weeks that followed, missing person flyers went up around Council Bluffs. Larry's family continued searching desperately for any sign of him. But here's where the story takes an eerie turn. During one of the interviews with Sergeant Danielson, Larry's mother Anna said something that would prove to be chillingly accurate, though nobody realized it at the time. She told the sergeant that she had a strong feeling, a mother's intuition, that Larry had never actually left the no-frills supermarket where he worked. Sergeant Danielson noted this comment in his report, but honestly, it didn't make much sense. Larry hadn't been scheduled to work that day. His car wasn't in the parking lot. There was no obvious reason why he would have gone to the store. But Anna was insistent. She just knew, somehow, that her son was still there. The police didn't search the no-frills supermarket at the time. Why would they? Larry wasn't supposed to be there, and there were no indications that he had gone to his workplace. Instead, the investigation focused on other possibilities. Had Larry gotten disoriented in the blizzard and succumbed to the cold somewhere in the city? Had he left Council Bluffs entirely? Was he staying with someone they didn't know about? As the months turned into years with no new leads, Larry's case gradually went cold. But something strange was happening at the no-frills supermarket. Customers who shopped there regularly started noticing an awful smell in one particular area of the store. It was strongest near the refrigerated section in the back of the store, and it was unlike anything you'd expect in a grocery store. Some customers described it as a horrible dead smell. One shopper would later recall asking a butcher if the smell was coming from dried blood in the meat-cutting area, but the butcher insisted everything back there was spotlessly clean. Another customer said the smell was so strong and so nauseating that she had to leave the store and never came back. Others just assumed it was a problem with the refrigeration, or maybe some food that had rotted somewhere in the walls. But the smell persisted for years. The no-frills supermarket finally closed its doors permanently in 2016, 7 years after Larry disappeared. The building sat vacant for another 3 years, empty and deteriorating. And that brings us back to January 24th, 2019, when the contractors showed up to start demolition work. When the workers discovered the remains wedged behind the cooler, they immediately called 911. Police officers responded to the scene and began investigating what they initially treated as a potential crime scene. But as they examined the remains and the surrounding area, a picture started to emerge of what had likely happened here. The body was stuck in an 18-inch gap between the back of the massive cooler units and the wall. The coolers themselves were about 12 feet tall, and their tops were used for storage. Former employees would later tell investigators that it was actually pretty common for workers to climb up on top of these coolers, even though they technically weren't supposed to. Some employees used the space up there to hide from customers and take unofficial breaks. It was relatively private and out of view. What police believed had happened was this. At some point, someone had climbed up on top of these coolers and then somehow fallen sideways into that narrow 18-inch gap. Once you fell into that space, you'd slide all the way down to the bottom, 12 feet below, and you'd become completely wedged between the cooler and the wall. You wouldn't be able to climb out. You wouldn't be able to turn around. And even if you screamed for help, the noise from the coolers running constantly would drown out your voice. Nobody would hear you. The remains were sent to the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation Criminalistics Laboratory for identification and autopsy. The process took 6 months. Finally, in July of 2019, the lab confirmed what Larry's family had already begun to suspect in their hearts. The DNA from the remains matched DNA samples provided by Victor and Anna Murillo-Moncada. The body was their son, Larry. He had been dead behind that cooler for nearly 10 years. The blue clothing found on the body matched exactly what Larry had been wearing when he ran out of his parents' house on November 28, 2009. The autopsy showed no signs of trauma, no evidence of foul play. The medical examiner ruled Larry's death an accident. Investigators pieced together what they believe happened that terrible day. After Larry ran out of his parents' home in the middle of the blizzard, barefoot and disoriented from his mental health crisis, he apparently made his way to the No Frills supermarket where he worked. Remember, it was less than a mile from his house. Former employees confirmed that it wasn't unusual for staff members to come to the store, even when they weren't scheduled to work. Larry knew the building well. He knew about the storage area on top of the coolers where employees would sometimes go. Police believed that Larry, in his confused and frightened state, climbed up onto the coolers, perhaps trying to hide or calm down. And then, somehow, he fell sideways into that 18-inch gap. He likely died within hours, trapped in that narrow space, unable to call for help. His voice drowned out by the mechanical noise of the refrigeration units. For the next 7 years, Larry Murillo-Moncada's body remained behind that cooler, while customers shopped in the store just a few feet away, complaining about a strange smell they couldn't identify. After the store closed in 2016, his body stayed there for another 3 years until contractors finally discovered it in 2019. His mother had been right all along. Her son had never left the No Frills supermarket. Sergeant Danielson, who had worked on Larry's missing person case back in 2009, would later tell reporters that this was one of the oddest cases he'd ever encountered. You hear about people being found in walls or hidden spaces occasionally, but to have someone missing for an entire decade, with their body hidden in plain sight at their workplace while the store continued operating for years, was extraordinarily unusual. Larry's family finally had the closure they'd been searching for, though it came with the devastating confirmation that their son had died alone, trapped and afraid. While they searched desperately for him throughout the city, the case was officially closed and classified as an accidental death. So that's going to do it. Until next time, see ya.